Hello there, traveler. You've wandered into a quiet corner of the world, a place where the night stretches gently across the sky, and the stars blink softly like old memories. Tonight, we're not in any one place. We're drifting through time, through centuries, and across quiet villages, echoing cobbled lanes, flickering lamplight, and ancient wooden doors drawn shut for the night. And tonight's tale is not about kings or wars. It's about sleep, not the kind of sleep filled with dreams and comforted by soft pillows and electric lights. No, we'll be exploring a different kind of sleep, one shaped by caution, necessity, tradition, and the ever-present unknown of the nighttime world. It's the story of the night watch, the gentle rhythm of human vigilance in a sleeping world. For thousands of years, people have gone to sleep with a sense of alertness, a habit passed down through generations. Sleeping in shifts, taking turns, staying awake, listening for the rustle of danger or the whisper of the wind through an open window. Tonight, you'll hear stories from ancient hamlets and forgotten camps, monastic cells and merchant ships, of lantern-bearing watchers and quiet footsteps echoing through moonlit courtyards. And as we walk through this calming tale, let the sound of history soothe your thoughts. You don't need to remember it all. You don't need to stay awake. Just rest, breathe deeply. Let the gentle murmur of the past carry you into sleep. We'll begin long ago, in the cradle of human civilization, long before walls were built, before lanterns swayed gently from iron hooks, before clocks ticked in wooden towers. There were only stars, firelight, and silence. In the vast openness of the ancient world, the first people lived in close-knit communities, small groups of families and wanderers, huddled together in tents or shelters. And when the sun set, the darkness came, unbroken and full. For our early ancestors, night was not just a time of rest. It was a time of uncertainty. The wild world came alive in the shadows. Lions stirred. Wolves howled in the distance. Strangers could come unnoticed in the dark dots, so they watched. They took turns. One or two souls, sitting by the fire, rubbing their eyes, listening to the gentle breathing of the sleeping tribe. They might poke the embers with a stick, stoke the flames to keep them from fading, watch the stars rise, and then drift behind the morning mist. Anthropologists tell us that in many tribal societies across continents, this pattern was nearly universal. Segmented sleep, broken into shifts, a few hours of slumber, then rising, taking a quiet watch, then resting again. It was practical, but also communal. People felt safe knowing someone was listening, someone was watching. And so, the earliest night watchers weren't warriors or guards. They were caretakers, just someone keeping the world warm and safe for those at rest. From the forests of early Europe to the grassy plains of Africa and the cool valleys of ancient Asia, the tradition of sleeping with one eye open was born, not out of fear, but out of love and duty. And even now, in quiet places of the world, you'll find echoes of these earliest night watchers. The sound of a fire crackling softly, a dog yawning by the hearth, and someone, just barely awake, listening for nothing at all. Let's travel now to a later time, to the heart of medieval Europe. The streets are narrow and winding. Stone houses crowd close together, and darkness comes early. There is no electricity, only candles, oil lamps, and the occasional torch carried by hand. When the sun sets, the gates of the town are locked tight. Merchants shut their stalls. Children are called in, and doors are barred for the night. But not everyone sleeps. In every town, there were night watchmen. Their job was to walk the streets slowly, steadily, keeping an eye on things. They carried wooden staves, lanterns, and sometimes little bells. In some cities, they were required to call out the time and weather as they passed. 2 o'clock, and all is well. Imagine hearing that faint voice in the dark, a signal that someone was out there, awake while others slept, a comfort to some, a curiosity to others. The medieval night wasn't just empty. It had its own life. There were bakers starting dough in the quiet hours before dawn. There were monks rising to chant prayers. There were mothers feeding infants, and craftsmen waking early for work. And always, the soft, echoing steps of the night watchman, moving down cobbled streets, passing under the shadow of wooden beams and stone walls. They didn't often catch criminals, but that wasn't the point. Their presence was a reminder that in the long stretch of the night, you weren't entirely alone. Let's step beyond the town walls now, two places more remote. Stone fortresses, wooden watchtowers, and lonely mountain outposts, where night fell harder and sleep came in shifts. Imagine a medieval castle perched on a cold hilltop, its stone walls thick and unyielding. Inside, the halls are lit by torches and hearth fires. Guards wear layers of wool and leather to keep the chill at bay. And as the great hall quiets, and the lord and lady retire, a rhythm of footsteps begins, not hurried, not loud, just a soft pace of the castle watch. At all hours of the night, a handful of guards would patrol the battlements, checking gates, peering into the darkness beyond the moat, pausing to warm their hands over small braziers. In times of peace, they saw only the stars and heard only owls, but the duty remained the same. Castles were never fully asleep. The kitchens sometimes stayed active through the night, boiling water or tending to animals. A servant might rise to fetch water or stir a fire. In the chapel, a candle might flicker beside a crucifix as a lone monk whispers a prayer in the silence. And up above, on the highest tower, a lookout watched the horizon. He might shift from foot to foot to keep warm. He might hum softly to himself to stay awake. And all the while, the world below slumbered in peace, unaware of his quiet vigil. In many castles, bells were placed in every tower, not to mark the hour, but to signal alarm, should the quiet night ever break. Yet most nights, they stayed silent, a silence earned by watchful eyes and long, patient hours by those who kept the night safe, one careful breath at a time. Now we drift into the quieter corners of the past, not in castles or towers, but in simple homes, cottages, cabins, one-room dwellings built of wood and stone. In pre-industrial Europe, long before electricity, nighttime meant true darkness, and true darkness shaped how people slept. It might surprise you to know that people didn't always sleep in one solid block of 8 hours. No, in many times and places, sleep came in two parts, what they called first sleep and second sleep. After sunset, families would gather around the hearth. They might eat a warm porridge or soup, say their prayers, tuck children under heavy wool blankets, and drift into the first sleep, a deep slumber that lasted a few hours. Around midnight, many people would naturally wake, not from noise or alarm, but from the rhythm of their bodies. They would rise briefly, tend to the fire, sip warm ale or water, maybe visit the chamber pot or check on animals. In some places, they might even talk quietly, read scripture by candlelight, or sit and think. Then, slowly, sleep would return, and the second sleep would carry them to dawn. This two-part sleep was normal, expected, and even restful. It allowed for reflection in the stillest hours of the night, when the world felt paused and time moved more gently. Children nestled close to their parents. Chickens clucked softly in nearby coops. Outside, frost crept over the grass, unseen, and inside, the fireside and settled. Sleep in the past was not just a necessity. It was a shared ritual, one shaped by firelight, weather, and silence, and always a sense that someone, whether family, servant, or watchman, was near enough to hear. If anything stirred in the dark. As we drift deeper into the gentle embrace of the past, let's leave the stone walls of Europe behind and travel softly, east and west, across oceans and rivers, deserts and plains. In every corner of the world, sleep has looked a little different. But one thing has remained the same. The night has always brought with it a sense of awareness, of gentle caution, a willingness to rest, but never too deeply. In ancient Japan, during the Edo period, homes were made of paper-thin walls, rice paper screens stretched over bamboo frames. These walls let in sound, wind, even moonlight. Privacy was delicate, so sleep, too, was light, respectful, and attuned to every creak of the wooden floor. People slept on tatami mats, close to one another. Parents kept babies swaddled nearby. A small candle might flicker in the corner of the room, its flame watched by the last person to sleep. In nomadic Bedouin camps, sleep was taken beneath stars. Tents were woven from goat hair, and the desert wind often stirred through them. Caravans rested in rings, forming makeshift walls. But always, someone stayed awake, a trader's apprentice, a cousin, an elder with weary eyes, keeping an ear out for rustling sand or distant hoofbeats. In the frozen Arctic, Inuit families huddled in snow homes, igloos, their walls thick with silence. And while sleep was deep in such still places, it was also attentive, because even in the quietest parts of the world, a crack in the ice or the howl of a distant dog could stir someone from slumber. And in the courts of ancient Persia, sleep was a carefully managed luxury. Palace servants padded softly through shadowed corridors. Guards paced along garden walls, and royalty slept in high-ceilinged rooms draped with embroidered curtains, while someone nearby remained gently awake, just in case. No matter the land, whether snow-covered, sea-bound, desert dry, or misty and green, humans have always known how to sleep, but also how to stay just slightly aware, to listen, to wait, to keep each other safe. In silence, let's walk beside a slow-moving caravan now. Along the ancient Silk Road, the path is wide and worn. It winds through deserts, hills, and open plains. And every night, as the sky turns indigo, the travelers make camp. They light fires, tether camels, boil tea, and when the meal is done, one by one, they settle to sleep, but not all at once. The night watch, a small group chosen by turn, would stay awake, wrapped in robes, sipping from clay cups. They would pace quietly, listening to the wind, the fire crackling, the low hum of snoring companions. Sometimes, one would hum a song, a melody passed down from caravan to caravan, meant to keep the watcher company in the long stretch of night. Watchers weren't just on guard against bandits. They also looked for signs of storms, shifting sands, or troubled animals. A camel stirring at the edge of camp might mean something is coming. A sudden gust might blow embers too near the tent cloth. And so, they watched. In Mongol camps, a similar system existed. Nomadic families often formed large groups, called ordias, mobile communities, moving across the steppe. At night, horses were tied, yurts fastened, children laid down close to their mothers, and the youngest warriors, strong, alert, would walk the camp's edge, quiet, respectful, letting others sleep beneath wool and hide. While the moon climbed overhead, even in the vast emptiness of the wild, people made safety with nothing more than a fire and a willing pair of eyes. There is a special kind of stillness found in monasteries, a quiet deeper than silence, where stone corridors echo with whispers, and candles never fully burn out. In medieval Europe, monastic life was built on rhythm, the liturgy of the hours, a sacred division of day and night into moments of prayer, rest, and work. Monks and nuns did not sleep the whole night through. They rose at set intervals to chant prayers in the dark. Vigils, they were called, midnight prayers, 2 a.m. hymns, a choir of soft voices rising into the wooden rafters, before returning to simple beds made of straw or rough linen. These spiritual night watchers believed the soul must be awake even when the body longs for sleep, and so they practiced awareness in darkness, a holy attentiveness. Not only monks, but also Sufi mystics, early Christian hermits, and Buddhist monks in distant temples, each, in their own way, watched the night. Some swept the floors in silence, others tended lamps that must never go out, others still sat cross-legged in meditation, breathing slowly, listening to the world in its quietest hour. They were not guarding against danger, they were watching for peace, and in their stillness, they taught generations that being awake in the night need not be frightening. It could be sacred. It could be gentle, Now we leave the stillness of land behind and step softly onto the creaking planks of a ship at sea. The year might be 1620 or 1725 or even earlier. The vessel sways gently in the waves, its sails taut in the night wind, the stars overhead guiding its course. At sea, night does not bring silence. Instead, there is the sound of rope straining, wood groaning, and the endless hush of waves licking the hull. And still, there is sleep. But on the open waters, sleep came in short moments. Never all at once. Always on rotation. Sailors slept in shifts. They shared hammocks, slung between beams, small spaces barely wide enough to turn. Blankets damp with salt, the air thick with the smell of tar and seawater. Above deck, the night watch took its place. They moved slowly, watching the sails, checking the compass, keeping an eye on the horizon. If it rained, they wore cloaks. If it was clear, they glanced at the stars and whispered old tales. Some ships had bells struck every half hour to mark the watch. Others had hourglasses filled with sand, turned with care to keep time flowing evenly in the dark. In Viking ships, long before gunpowder and compass, the practice was much the same. Rowers and warriors slept in narrow bunks, while one or two kept eyes on the sea. A shield rattling, a change in the wind, all could mean something was coming. But most nights were calm. The ship moved forward, slow and steady. The night watch leaned on the rail, eyes half-lidded, breathing in the salt air. And below, the crew rocked gently in their sleep, cradled by the rhythm of the sea. As time moved forward, and towns became cities, the night remained a mysterious world of shadows and soft voices. In colonial towns, from Boston to Bruges, Delhi to Dublin, the night watch remained a fixture of urban life. Before organized police forces existed, communities appointed men to walk the streets. Sometimes they were volunteers, sometimes paid a modest wage, sometimes just citizens taking turns. They carried rattles, wooden instruments they could spin to make a clacking sound if they needed to raise alarm. Some wore cloaks and tricorn hats, others just a heavy coat and boots. Their lanterns flickered through the fog. Their footsteps echoed in narrow alleyways. They listened for broken glass, the sound of hooves, the creak of a shop door left ajar. But they also noticed small, lovely things. A cat slipping along a fence, a candle still burning in a window, the scent of bread baking early in the bakery down the street. Some watchmen sang or hummed as they walked. Others repeated the hours aloud, just as their ancestors had done. 3 o'clock, and all is quiet. In many cities, tavern keepers and innkeepers would greet the watch with mugs of tea or ale, a moment of warmth before returning to the chill of the streets. And when dawn crept in, pale and golden, the night watch would hand off their duty to the light and slowly make their way home. To sleep, in many cities, large and small, the night came with rules. On medieval Paris, church bells rang out the curfew, the cover fire, a signal for people to extinguish hearths and go indoors. The curfew. Later, in 17th century London, the bell in St. Mary-le-Bow rang to mark the watch. Its chimes echoed through narrow streets and riverfront alleys. To some, it meant safety. To others, it meant that the doors must be locked tight. City watchmen patrolled not only to look for danger, but to remind people of the hour, to enforce quiet, to carry messages or check lanterns left burning too long. In places like Amsterdam and Edinburgh, the night watch became more structured. They had uniforms, posts, and written logs, still humble, still human, but gradually turning toward the kind of service we would one day call policing. But it was not the same as it is today. These were still sleepy towns, still lit by moonlight and fire, still hushed. The bells were not loud. They rang gently through the air. Their purpose was not alarm, but rhythm. And so, the city fell into a tempo, a nighttime pattern of sound and silence, footsteps and bells, snoring and whispers, all blending into the quiet song of sleeping history. For much of human history, night was not just a time of sleep. It was a realm, a space where the seen faded and the unseen stirred. Before gaslight, before electric bulbs, before we could flood our homes with brightness at the flip of a switch. Darkness truly was dark, and with that darkness came stories, softly whispered, passed down in hushed voices. Tales to explain the creaks, the chills, and the strange shadows that danced across the walls. In medieval Europe, the night was believed to belong to spirits and mischief. Witches were thought to travel by moonlight, ghosts wandered lonely roads, and the devil, some said, preferred to walk the earth when no one could see him. It was common for people to hang protective herbs above their doors before bed, sprigs of rosemary, bundles of sage, a pinch of salt by the threshold. Shoes might be turned on their sides, facing away from the bed, to confuse visiting spirits. In parts of the Middle East, stories of the jinn warned of wandering at night. Not all jinn were evil, some were simply mischievous, but best not to draw attention while the stars were high. In ancient China, night was governed by the yin, the cool, the dark, the soft, but it was also a time when ghosts might rise from the underworld, seeking incense or unfulfilled prayers. And yet, though these superstitions might sound frightening, they were often told gently. Two children curled under quilts, or shared in low tones by hearthlight. They became part of the rhythm of sleep, not obstacles to rest, but little rituals that made sleep feel protected. A locked door, a whispered charm, a candle left burning just long enough to drift off, because fear of the night in the old world wasn't always sharp or loud. It was soft, lingering, a quiet reason to stay near family and to keep the fire warm. As towns grew into cities, and cities into sprawling metropolises, the quiet, humble night watch began to change. In London, by the early 1800s, the job of watching the night became more formal. The Metropolitan Police Force was born, the world's first organized modern police agency. The friendly, sleepy watchman with a lantern was slowly replaced by trained officers in uniform. Night watch became night patrol. Footsteps echoed with more purpose. Lanterns became then electric bulbs. In Paris, New York, Berlin, and beyond, the same transformation took place. The night grew brighter, the streets louder, and while safety increased for many, the intimacy of those old nights began to fade. No more calling the hour, no more tea shared at a gate, no more neighbors knowing which friend was keeping watch. And yet, some traditions lingered in rural villages and small towns. Even into the 20th century, one could still hear stories of local watchmen who would sit outside the baker's shop or carry a whistle and a wooden rattle. They were part of the neighborhood, part of the night's gentle rhythm. And even now, in some corners of the world, there are still people who keep an eye on the night for no other reason than it brings comfort. A neighbor, a farmer checking the barns, a fisherman walking to the docks at 3 a.m. They carry the quiet spirit of the old watchman, not out of fear, but out of love for the sleeping world. And now, as the night begins to soften and the stars give way to the first hints of morning light, we pause to reflect. Through thousands of years, across thousands of lands, humans have always cherished the idea of being watched over while they sleep. From tribal fires to stone towers, from desert camps to candlelit homes, from rattling bells to whispered prayers, the night has always belonged to those who stayed awake so others could rest. We tend to think of history as the story of battles, of kings and inventions. But there is also a gentler history, a history of small, repeated acts, of someone putting more wood on the fire, of someone listening to the wind, of someone staying up just a little longer to let the rest of us close our eyes. Even now, in our modern world, as city lights glow and traffic hums, there are nurses in hospital corridors, pilots in high skies, parents in quiet nurseries, and yes, neighbors who turn on the porch light, just in case the night still belongs to watchers, and perhaps, in some way, it always will. So now, dear listener, as we close the final page of this soft journey through the sleeping past, let your eyes grow heavy. You've walked quiet roads, heard ancient bells, imagined firelight flickering against stone walls, and felt the hush of centuries behind. You are safe. you are warm, and somewhere, in the long memory of humankind, the watch still stands. Someone is tending the fire. Someone is walking the walls. Someone is holding the lantern, so that you can sleep. Breathe in slowly. Let your thoughts drift like mist. You don't have to remember everything we said tonight. Just let it settle, like falling leaves. Soft and silent. Close your eyes and rest. The night is gentle, and so are you. Jab, hum night watch. Katazawar, Cartagena, Axer, Zehan, Maine, Europe K and Horagalian, Maine, Gumtahua, Ekchokadar, Atahai, Hoth Main Lantern, Moon Say Narm, Awaz Main, Wakt Batata, Hua, Lekin, Rot, Kinajabani Surf, Europe Tak, Madud Nahi Har Tazib, Harkam, Apni Terake Se Rot Ko, Mefuz Banana Kasilsala, Rakti Thi. Let's softly drift now to the peaceful streets of Edo period Japan in the 17th and 18th centuries. Tokyo, U.S. Wakt Edo Ake, Shahar Tha Jahan Lakreda, Hugh Lakrite, Hugh Lakrike, Gar, Nadyong se guzarti hui hawa o bambu, ke jarako men se changta, hua, moonlight. Rotka ek kushbu se barpur manzarbanet teyahan, kayo jimbo, yani raat karahwale, bambu kahatiar, lekar patrolling karta. Unkepaz, hota ek wooden klapa gis, hayoshiji, kitte jaise, wo, dono hafen se baha, karlogon, ko, agakarta. Beware of fire. Beware of thieves. The night is still long. Yewa sheher, mengunchtithi, notesna, kafnak, pasek, yadehani, kadorpar, kikoi, hai, jo, jog, raha, hai, jab, baki, sab, so rahe, hain. Now, we float, calmly, to the warm winds of West Africa, where night carried rhythm, not silence. In many traditional societies, especially in areas of modern-day Mali, Ghana, and Senegal, there were village drummers who played soft, steady beats, not for celebration, but as night signals. These drummers would sit by central fires, gently striking the talking drums, sending coded messages from one village to the next, a form of communication and protection. The drums said, "All is calm, the roads are safe, no danger tonight." And people would listen as they fell asleep, letting the steady beat lull them like a lullaby. The night had a rhythm, a heartbeat, and with each beat came peace. Across time, before people laid their heads down, they often followed gentle rituals, little customs to soothe the body and calm the spirit. In ancient India, evening was a time for oil massages. Warm sesame oil was rubbed into the scalp and feet, a tradition called abhyanga, believed to release heat, reduce stress, and invite restful sleep. Candles made of ghee would be lit, and gentle Sanskrit mantras whispered to cleanse the air before slumber. In the Ottoman Empire, people drank warm milk with cardamom, or tea infused with rose petals. Beds were low to the ground and covered in layered quilts, and someone in the home would often read soft verses from the Quran to bring peace to the night. In Scandinavia, elderly family members would tell stories, old folk tales by the hearth, as everyone wrapped themselves in fur-lined cloaks. Children fell asleep to the sound of their grandmother's voice and the wind tapping gently at the wooden windows. So many paths to sleep, so many gentle preparations. Sleep, in every culture, was treated with softness, with respect, and sometimes, even with ceremony. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the sounds of night in the ancient world, not the blare of traffic or the hum of electronics, but the soft murmur of nature and life. In a Roman villa, you might hear the faint splash of a courtyard fountain, the coo of night doves in the rafters, and the distant clink of a servant preparing early bread. In an Egyptian home near the Nile, the chirping of crickets, the flap of linen curtains in the warm breeze, and the gentle lapping of river water would become a lullaby of their own. In the Scottish Highlands, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of heather, and the occasional bark of a distant sheepdog. These were the white noise machines of the ancient world. Even the bells of the night watch, rung softly at intervals, were comforting, not alarming. They reminded the people that someone was there, that someone was awake, so they didn't have to be. As we drift further into the story of the night watch, let us take a quiet look at the simple things these guardians carried, the tools that helped them move silently through the dark, keeping others safe without disturbing their sleep. In medieval cities across Europe, the watchman's most iconic item was the lantern, made from iron or brass, and lit with a single flickering candle or oil flame. It cast a soft circle of golden light around their feet, just enough to see the cobbled path, but not enough to wake a sleeping household. They often carried a staff, sometimes just a thick wooden rod, sometimes tipped with iron, not for battle, but to knock gently on doors in case of danger, or to tap the stones as a way of saying, "I am here. You are not alone." Some wore thick woolen cloaks, not just for warmth, but to muffle the sound of movement. The cloaks swayed slowly with their steps, turning them into quiet shadows beneath the moon. In certain cities, watchmen also carried horns or small bells, not to sound alarms, but to softly mark the passing hours, or to let others on patrol know they were near. These were humble tools, no swords, no shields, just things that made them visible to the peaceful and invisible to those who meant harm. And now, as the world begins to grow even quieter, let me tell you a small, gentle story about a watchman named Thomas, who walked the old stone paths of a tiny village tucked between the green hills of 15th century England. Thomas had been a shepherd once, but after his knees began to ache, he found a new purpose: to walk the lanes. At night, while his neighbors slept, he didn't wear armor or carry a blade, only a walking stick, a lantern, and a soft leather satchel. Each evening, he'd light his lantern at the village hearth, whisper a prayer for safety, and step out into the night. He walked slowly, not because of his age, but because he loved to notice things. He would pause under the lime tree near the chapel, where an owl always perched. He'd tip his cap to it, and it would hoot softly in return. He'd walk past a bakery and smile, smelling the faint aroma of tomorrow's bread. Sometimes he'd find a door left ajar and would close it gently, leaving a small pebble at the step to let the owner know. Thomas never had to chase thieves or call for help. He simply watched, and in doing so, he gave the village the most precious gift of all, the peace of knowing someone was awake. Beyond the town walls, beyond the lanterns and bell towers, there were the open roads, stretches of land where shadows grew long, and the sky opened wide. These roads were watched too, not by night patrols with bells, but by travelers, hermits, and sometimes even shepherds, who stayed awake through the night with their flocks under the stars. In the Middle Ages, small stone shelters, called hospices or pilgrim houses, were scattered along these routes. Inside, a single candle might glow, lit by a friar or nun keeping watch through the window. Their purpose was simple: to give light to anyone passing through the night. People often traveled at night to avoid the sun or to move in secret during times of unrest. And these quiet shelters became beacons of peace, simple places with hay beds, a jug of water, and sometimes a soft voice saying, "You are welcome, rest a while." As we come closer to the end of our tale, let us gently reflect on the one thing we all share with the people of the past, that moment just before sleep takes over. In every age, every village, every civilization, there has always been that same stillness when the body becomes heavy, the world becomes soft, and dreams begin to rise like morning mist. The people of history, they didn't fall asleep with headphones or white noise, but with the hush of wind, the creak of wood, and maybe a distant footstep of someone on watch. And just like us, they too closed their eyes thinking of loved ones, of work left unfinished, of distant stars. Sleep has always been a bridge from one day to the next, and someone, somewhere, was always watching over. So as you rest now, know that you are part of that long, unbroken tradition of gentle dreams, of quiet safety, of drifting slowly into a peaceful night. Good night. Sleep well. Dad, to the winding alleys of Cordoba. The night held sacred meaning. Dain, the golden cities of the Islamic world, from the glimmering lights of Berkness, was not only a time to rest, but a time for reflection, for prayer, for gentle guardianship. Among the soft domes and minarets, where the call to prayer echoed. During the day, there was also the quiet work of the Morakab, the watchman of the night. In the 10th century, Baghdad, the jewel of the Abbasid Caliphate, had established an organized system of night patrols. These men were appointed by the Mutasib, a kind of city inspector responsible for public order. The night guards would walk the streets to enforce curfews, settle small disputes, and gently remind wandering souls to return home. But they also did something beautiful. Many would softly recite verses from the Quran or poetry of the time, letting the words echo through the darkened courtyards. The sound, not loud, but like the murmur of wind against carved stone, was a comfort to the sleepers. They carried lanterns made of pierced brass, casting intricate patterns on the ground, their shadows dancing like arabesque calligraphy across whitewashed walls. Now, let us gently move eastward, to the fragrant, lantern-lit cities of the Mughal Empire, places like Lahore, Delhi, and Agra, where jasmine-scented air met the silence of sleeping courtyards. In these cities, where great emperors once ruled by day, there existed a quiet, humble class of night workers, the chowkidars. The chowkidar was not just a guard, he was the keeper of peace. He would softly chant as he walked, beating his lati, or stick, on the stones to let people know he was near. The rhythm was slow and strangely calming. It was not a threat, it was a lullaby. In many homes, families said their final prayers and drifted into slumber only after hearing the chowkidar pass by. He wore simple clothing, often a cotton tunic and shawl, with a scarf tied loosely around his head. His lantern, often oil-fueled, glowed faintly through stained glass or thin cloth. He watched over spice merchants, sleeping elephants, and quiet shrines, and in doing so, he preserved a sense of nighttime serenity that is still remembered in old songs and stories throughout history. Night did not belong to everyone. In many towns and cities, curfews were common. The word itself comes from the Old French couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire. In medieval Europe, when the curfew bell rang at dusk, households were expected to bank their hearth fires, dim their lamps, and prepare for bed, not just to prevent fires, but to maintain peace. Walking after dark without reason was often frowned upon, not because of fear, but because night was treated as sacred. Stillness was respected. In towns like Canterbury or York, curfews were enforced not by threat, but by rhythm, the regular tolling of bells from distant towers. One could imagine the soft gong drifting through the foggy air, marking time like a heartbeat. Some villages even had night silence laws, where shouting or singing past sunset was gently discouraged. These laws weren't harsh. They were, in their own way, like a lullaby for the land.